In this video, we're going to talk about the transformations. What that means is what you can do with this selection mode. So if it's an object, and we talked about these, what you can do with the nodes and those different type of a transformation. So it's a simple transformation you can do with this selection mode is what we're about to do. So it's mainly this thing works both for object and path. So to create things easy, I will start with objects. So here's a rectangular object I created. So I'm going to resize the stroke. So resize the stroke and the color and go back to the selection mode in there. So first thing we're going to talk about is scaling. If you use the selection mode, there are these arrows, and by using this arrow here, you can kind of diagonally scale this one, and also you can use this horizontal one, actually horizontally scale this thing. So it's this is what you can do with these arrow thing. Now I just added this thing here I'm about to explain. Rather than just click on that arrow, diagonal arrow, moving around it like this, if you use control and move around that thing, it'll actually maintain this aspect ratio of this thing. This is very, very useful. So for example, you really like this ratio, and in here you do not want to mess up with this ratio, but you wanted to make it larger. And then rather than just grabbing that and do that with your mouse, hold the control key and do that, and it's going to be actually making it larger in here and keeping that aspect ratio. So let me do that again because I wanted to demonstrate one more thing as well. Hold control key and grab that, make it larger in here. I want you to notice that not only did it actually magnified this entire thing, keeping the aspect ratio, it actually made this stroke thicker. If that's what you wanted, it's great. If that's not what you wanted, we have two options. You can go back to this object and use these object nodes, and then it's going to keep this stroke width. But if it has happened not to be object, then you have to do that, and there's a way to do that, and which is the following. Let's go back to the real size, and I haven't talked about all the options here, but if you're in this, even in the selection mode, there are lots of options available above there. But if you go back to the very end, there is this 4 button. If you place your cursor over it, it'll explain it. It says, when scaling objects, scale the stroke width by the same proportion. So it's a proportion means if you make it bigger, it gets bigger. But if you click that off, it's not selected, and then control and drag. And right now, and as soon as you release it, and you will see it goes back to the original width side. So it turns out it's very useful. So I use that a lot whenever I rescale it. But the control is the thing that's very, very useful. And you have to experiment whenever you do, either you're in object mode or you're in path mode or selection mode. Always play with control and alt and see what it does. But give you some idea about the control is kind of constraining it. Right, I resized it, and the next item I would like to talk about is rotation. Apologize, there's one more important thing I wanted to introduce about scaling. We already talked about control drag, but next one is a control shift. Let me write it over there. All right, written over there. Rather than just control and drag, keeping the aspect ratio, if you do control shift and drag, and you can see it's kind of scale it around the center, and it is indicating center position up there. Let me go and do that again. Hope you see there's a little red mark in the center. And if you just do control without shift, you can see there's a red mark down there. So that's the difference. So control shift versus control in there. So those are the two things I use all the time whenever I rescale and resize it. Now, next item is rotation. Now it's in the selection mode. If you click one more time, staying in the selection mode like that, and then it changes to rotation mode. There's a center is indicated. By dragging any of those, it's going to rotate um, this object. And here you can also use a control. So if you hold control key over there, it does not continuously rotate, but it rotates at like 90 degrees. So let me go back all the way to the original shape. And this time, not just rotating, it's a control rotating. Then you can see it changes like 22.5 degree, and then I don't know exactly how many degrees it rotates, but it gives you some of the discrete options there. Sometimes it's very useful if you wanted to go 45 degree, something like that. It's a good option to use. And I'm doing continuously like that, and clicking one more time, go back to the usual selection mode. So that's the rotation. So another thing I'd like to talk about the rotation is I go back to the rotation mode by clicking one more time. You can relocate the center. Sometimes it's useful. You can put the center, so I can see that it's useful if you actually put that center in the one of the corner, and then if you rotate it, as you can see, the center of rotation is now at the vortex of this rectangle like that. So let me put that center back in the somewhere in the interior area and click back onto the usual selection mode. So that's the rotation thing I'd like to talk about. The flip is that this is a new version. They have a new thing in there. There's a horizontal flip. There's a vertical flip. It's in there. So not sure if it is distinguishable. Let me squeeze it a little bit. I wanted to talk about it later. So hope you can distinguish this horizontal flip. Flip it horizontally and vertically. It's difficult to distinguish, but I think all of you know what we mean by horizontal flip and the vertical flip. So the flip is available. The skew is a very useful thing. That's the next thing I want to talk about. This is the only thing that's available from rectangular object, this rectangular thing. But if you want a parallelogram, you can squeeze it down here like that, and it gives you parallelogram shape. Also, you can look at it as like a 3D view of a rectangle thing in there. Now, even though we transform this thing, it still remains as an object. If you go below down there, and there's a status bar where you can see this is still recognized as a rectangle mode. So that means if you go back to this object button, if you click on that object button, you have this object node edit mode. So if I click on that, change it over there, it still changes this the round corner shape. So it is not path, it still remains as an object. So put it back in there. So that's a rotation and flip and skew. Next item is duplicate. This is used so many times, so it's absolutely most frequently used transformation tool. It is available under object, I think, and you can find duplicate. Maybe it's under edit. It's edit. There's a duplicate. Always, if it's used a lot, always learn these hotkey, shorthand key. So it's a Control D, standing for duplicate. Go back in here. I will rather use a hotkey in there. So Control D. Then we have duplicate is produced. I think it's slightly changed the border shape. It's difficult to see, but if you click on that drag down there, as you can see, a duplicate was produced. All right, by putting it up, side by side like that, as you can see, it created a little bit of 3D effect and things like that. So we absolutely use this all the time. Now I'm going to have a little fun with this duplicated object. So the one thing that another useful thing to select these things, if you want to select the bottom one, you have to carefully place your cursor and have to click on that to select the bottom one. And the top one, it's a rather large region, so you can just click on anywhere, it'll select that. For whatever reason, it is very difficult to select that, or is completely behind that, you have to use Alt and click. So if you first click on that, it'll choose a top one. But if you hold Alt key and click once again, then it'll select the bottom one. And if you move that around, you have to hold Alt key and drag, not just to drag in here, to move the bottom piece. Hold Alt key and move it around, and you can move your bottom key, one down there. So put it back in there. So that's another very, very useful thing we do. So right now the bottom one is selected. I'm going to remove the stroke by holding Shift key and then exit in there, and then change that color to the real dark one there. It looks like a shade. It's a little fun. But if you go to this fill and stroke dialog box at the bottom, you have a blur option in there. By clicking on that, by blurring a little bit, it truly looks like little shades. As you can see, it's really fun thing to do whenever you motivated to doing things like that. All right, now these two things are now kind of tied together. Of course, you wanted to um, recognize this whole thing as a one object, and you can do that by grouping. So by selecting in the selection mode, selecting the whole thing, as you can see, two things are selected. But if you just move it around like that, and you can see the shades are still down there, so you don't want to do that. So by selecting the whole thing, so you can see two things are selected, or I think that's the best way to do that. And you want to group it, and this is under the object, and there's a group, and we do this, use this a lot, so memorize the hotkey. It's a Control G, so I'll rather do that. Over here, I hit Control G, and now it's the one object. And I click off somewhere else and click on that thing again. As you can see now, this is, if you move around, there are two things. If you double click on that, I think, double click, maybe not. It's, if I think it did, I think it somewhat did. If you double click on that, it ungrouped this automatically. And we go ahead and regroup it. But there's also a command under object, ungroup. From there you can ungroup it. Next thing is also very, very useful. It's a control click. Let me write that down. So here I said it, control click. Now sometimes you want to edit, but it's grouped. So one way is that you ungroup and then select one of this object and do the operation. But you can do the following thing. If you want to choose this, the blur part without ungrouping it, is a control click. If you control click in there, then you selected the, what is that, the shade area. If you want to change the blur level a little bit to darker, then, the wider, it changes only the selected part. And maybe down here like this, you want to go back, a little bit more blur in there, and it only selected. So if you click outside and click back it in there, it is still one thing. Now let me go ahead and choose the top part and then change the color, control and click. It only changed the top part. Wanted to change the color a little bit to something else. I'm going to choose a blue one and go to fill in your fill and stroke dialog and change the lightness a little bit like that. I like that color better. So like that. So that's how I do it. These control and alt combinations sometimes kind of confusing. In my opinion, the only way to learn is that keep practicing and try alt and control always. So you actually learn from the experience, then it's actually internalized in you so you can use it fluently. I forgot one more important thing is called ordering, so I added it there, ordering. So this is actually two objects. One is this top, let me go ahead and delete that stroke, hold Shift key and remove that stroke. So we have that is one object, and I created the bottom one there, that's shades, and put it in there. It's hidden underneath it. So you will have multiple objects. So this is actually created at the very beginning. This is actually created at the very beginning. So if I put it up there, as you can see, it goes under. So there's a certain order when it displays. And if you go to the top page, top part there, the ordering button is there. So you can change this is a selected. If you want to put it to the very top part, you can use this button that says all the way to the top. By clicking on that, it'll put it to all the way to the top. So this is a reordering thing that you can do. So I'm about to write down a certain letter and write it in here because the new object is automatically um, puts it on top of it so that that wasn't you don't have to reorder that. But if you have if you selected that, I think if you use a tab, it's gonna go through the entire order of the stacking in there. Next order, it was a top one. So let me go and choose the other one. The next order, it'll go there. Next order, go there. Things like that. This was at the very end. Next order, next order. So sometimes this is useful, but you can always use an Alt key in there to select what is right underneath it. So that's ordering, and you can find that command in the object as well, but there are buttons here always. Next thing I'm going to do is not really transformation, it's the last part. It's just having a little fun in there. So first thing I'm going to do is a grouping. I'm going to take these two things into one group. It's a Control G. It's now grouped. It's a group. It's indicated in the status bar. If I move it around, it's there. So I'm going to write something in there and then skew it so that it looks like a three-dimensional version. So the selection mode, go to the text, and I double choose this Arial rounded bold, and then if you click on that, it remains as a Arial font. So I'm going to write now round font and click on that. I'm going to do that transformation, change the color and add the stroke a little bit. I'm going to make it thicker like I did it last time. So that looks like a more fun shape, and then the clarity there. Let's make it a little bit bigger, maybe smaller so that I can fit in to that over here. So there it is. So I'm going to make the entire thing into one object by Control G. Then if you move it around, they're all in one thing. Now, next thing I'm going to do is a transformation. So if I rotate this one a little bit in there, and then click back onto the non-rotation mode and put it down there like that, and maybe horizontally flip it like that. So now, as you can see, it's a little bit of a 3D effect you created. It's very simple and neat, easy thing you can do by skewing. So that concludes my video about transformation that are available under this selection mode button. And also I introduced very useful hotkeys in these handling all this transformation. Thanks.